Well, hello everyone, and I'm delighted to say that on today's podcast we're joined by Rob Bilott, an environmental lawyer from Cincinnati, Ohio. I hope I've got that right. Most notably engaged in a 20-year plus legal battle, fundamentally with the company DuPont, that produces a number of materials, to expose the risk to the public of what are called PFAS, so-called forever chemicals. Now, I've been madly researching this. I've seen the film Dark Waters, which we shall come on to later on. But I understand these PFAS chemicals, that you can have PFOA, PFOS. In layman's terms, Rob, of course, all I know is that they're dangerous. They're in Teflon, or they were in Teflon. They certainly, my parents had Teflon pans in the 80s and the 90s. And these chemicals, these dangerous chemicals as they are present in somewhere around 99% of humans. Is that right?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. First of all, thanks so much for having me on. Yeah, these are completely man-made chemicals, and they are quite a mouthful if you try to talk about each of the individual members of this family of. Now, I think some people estimate there could be up to 12,000 of these chemicals in the PFAS forever chemical family. Two of them, the ones we know the most about, are two of the ones I think you mentioned, PFOA and PFOS. And I guess just to kind of put that into perspective, these are chemicals that you may not have heard of them, you may not even be able to pronounce them, but they've been used in an incredible array of different products over the last 70 or 80 years. Essentially anything you see that's stain resistant or waterproof or nonstick, things like, as you mentioned, Teflon or Scotchgard. Stain-resistant waterproof clothing, carpeting, fast food wrappers and packaging, microwave popcorn bags, cosmetics, things that are waterproof, computer chips, firefighting foams, dental floss, I mean, you name it. And these were invented right after World War II, kind of as an outgrowth of the whole Manhattan Project research right after the war, and have been pumped out into all these products for ever since. And unfortunately, once they get out there, they tend to stick. They tend to stay in the environment. They don't break down. So they get into the air, they get into the soil, they get into the water, and most concerningly, they get into living things, including, as you mentioned, 99% of the people on this planet. It's now being found in polar bears and Arctic ice caps. So this stuff, and once they're out there, they don't break apart, they don't break down. They stay there, particularly these ones with 8 carbons, like PFOA and PFOS. They can stay there for thousands, if not millions of years before they start to break down. That's why you hear them referred to as forever chemicals. And it's taken decades to get this information out to the public, to regulators, to the scientific community, that these chemicals even exist, let alone toxic and dangerous they are. So the world is just now really becoming aware of what's been going on for the last 70, 80 years with these chemicals.
And what beggars belief really for me is that when you're talking 99% of us, that's going to include a lot of people working for, even managing and in the corporate structures of these companies, isn't it? So they're not immune from this. They're consuming in the same way, I presume.
Absolutely. It's unfortunately, these chemicals don't discriminate. They're found in everyone. They're found in tribes in New Guinea, that have had no contact with the outside world. The stuff falls in the rain, and it's incredibly pervasive. We're talking about contamination on a global, really unprecedented scale, and it's affecting all of us and children. Babies are born now pre-polluted with these chemicals. We're passing it on to our new and next generation. So it's very troubling.
Now, obviously, with your story, you worked and are working long and hard to show the truth of this, and that comes at a price, doesn't it? There was you encountered great resistance, as you would from a huge corporate entity, I guess. How did you personally cope with the stress and obviously what came at you relentlessly when you're actually just trying to access the truth for your clients?
It was a long process, I'll tell you. When I first started digging into this, when I'm a lawyer. I'm still working at the same law firm I've been working at since I graduated law school. It's now 32 years, and most of what I was doing early on was working with big chemical companies, helping them figure out, what can be emitted, what can be put into the air, the water, to comply with the laws. And when I first started delving into this issue, it took me a really long time to really believe what I was seeing. That there could be chemicals that were this toxic and dangerous and carcinogenic that weren't being regulated, that had escaped that entire system of regulations that we had in place. And that a company, in fact, several companies, could be covering up what was known about this, just withholding the information. That took a long time to really sit in. And when it did, it became a real weight on me to try to understand, what do we do about this? We were realizing we might have been the only folks that had seen this information outside these companies. And this was a massive public health threat. So that launched what has become now, I think it's been 24 years that we've been working on trying to find ways to get this information out to others, to the regulators, to the scientists, so that steps can be taken to start to protect people from this. But that was a long process. As you mentioned, there was a lot of resistance. This was information that was purposely being covered up and withheld. And so there was a big fight, to keep it covered up. And believe it or not, even despite the information that we've finally been able to start to get out to the rest of the world, these companies are still fighting this, are still trying to deny the science that now exists, are trying to escape liability for this. So the fight goes on. And I think what's kind of helped motivate me over the years is, the first client that came to me with this problem, he was a farmer in West Virginia, Mr. Tennant. When he and I were looking at these documents, and he sat back and said, people need to see this. And when they see the facts here, and they see the truth, it's gonna come out, and people will do the right thing. This will get fixed. And I have followed that belief since then, that if we can get this information to people, eventually people will do the right thing. They will see these facts for themselves. And we're starting to see that happen now. It's taken a long time to get there, but the laws are changing. The regulations are changing. Steps are being taken to get these chemicals out of products, to get steps taken to protect people from drinking this or being exposed. So it's happening. It took a long time, but ultimately that truth does come out, and I think people do the right thing.
Look, it's extraordinary. I would call it a story, but it's actually real life. So, obviously it captured the attention of Hollywood. Mark Ruffalo plays you, and Anne Hathaway, your wife. I did want to ask you, did you consider it to be pretty close to the truth? There's always a bit of license to tell a story naturally, but were you happy with that, the film, Dark Waters?
Yeah, absolutely. Mark Ruffalo had reached out to me back in 2016 after he read an article in the New York Times Magazine that was summarizing this whole story, and was really sort of shocked that something like this could have been going on in the United States, where we're supposed to be on the cutting edge of all these regulations and science, that this could be going on without anybody knowing about it. And the fact that he was reading it in the New York Times Magazine instead of on the front page of the New York Times. How do we get this story out to everybody? So he approached me, about how do we bring this story out to the wider audience? And he teamed up with the folks at Participant Media. And, because I wanted to make sure if this was getting done, that it was going to be done in a way that would help bring the truth in the story out to the public, and that it would stick to the truth, and that wouldn't be over sensationalized. And so he teamed up with a group at Participant Media, Director Todd Haynes, and did, I think, a fantastic job in taking a story that spans over 20 years with a lot of science and a lot of legal issues, a lot of complicated stuff, and really condensing it into 2 hours in a way that really conveys to people what happened. I was fortunate I was able to be a consultant on the film, and I got to be there during the filming. Most of what you see in the movie is filmed in Cincinnati, in our offices even. So I got to help, make sure that things were done correctly and accurately. And in fact, you see a lot of the real folks that were involved in this. We incorporated into the film, which I think helps impress upon people at the end. This really happened. This is actually happening, and these are real people that were impacted.
And you know what? Sometimes lawyers get a bad press, let's be honest, every now and again. And it was interesting how you said that at the start of your story, at the start of your working experience, you were sort of more on the corporate side, looking at those limits, looking at those thresholds, looking at the legalities surrounding them. Where was the conversion in you? Because going from the film, it seems to actually be Walter, Earl, that very much a sort of human experience that sort of tipped you into, hang on, I need to look at this a bit more closely.
Yeah, absolutely. There were so many things in this story that had to just align the right way for this to have happened the way it did. Beginning with the fact that when I got the first initial call from the farmer in West Virginia from Mr. Tennant, I was about to hang the phone up when he was telling me about cows dying. I mean, that's not what I did. I was working with big corporate clients and chemical companies. But when he mentioned he had gotten my name from my grandmother, and that he was from Parkersburg, and that was my mom's hometown. I mean, that was that family connection that got me to at least listen, and then it got me, to stay listening to him and to actually start digging into these documents. And really, it was seeing these things for myself, seeing these actual documents with the DuPont corporate letterhead or 3M company letterhead on it, where they themselves were laying out the science and showing these harmful effects and talking about should we tell anybody or not, and no, just to see that laid out in real terms and to realize, wait a minute, this is this is so different from the companies I was dealing with, who were trying to comply with the laws, who were trying to make sure they were doing the right thing. Here you had active attempts to try to get around the law, to try to cover up, to try to avoid having things regulated. And that really just opened my eyes, to a whole another realm of what could be going on with our environment. I had spent 8 years when I started off my legal career thinking I had learned how our whole system works. We had all these federal, international, state laws, rules, regulations, everything, was telling us which chemicals to be concerned about and how much. That as long as we complied with all that, everything was fine. We were doing what we needed to do. But when I started digging into this, it really opened my eyes that, there were these chemicals that were just outside that whole system. And there was this entire world occurring outside of that process. And that, frankly, it was going really unrecognized by the rest of the world that any of this could even happen. It's one of the reasons I wanted to get this story out to everyone, not only through the film, but through the book. I sat down to write a book as well because I had so many people asking, how can something like this happen? How can you have chemicals in all these products being made for all this period of time that are this toxic and this bad, and all this information was known, yet somehow the government didn't know? Somehow the public did. How does that happen? So I really wanted to find a way to lay this out and to show all the different things that all these different forces that have to collide to create what I call kind of the perfect storm of this massive contamination. It's not just it's not just the science being covered up, but it's the way the regulations are set and who sets them in that process. It's the way the science is generated, who publishes, and it's the way our legal system works. Who has the burden of proof, all those things together. So just really wanted to help people understand how this happened so that we can make sure it doesn't keep happening.
Absolutely. And I can tell how passionate you are about it. I mean, certainly to dedicate so much of your life to it, not just your working life. But there are some moments in the story, obviously, where it's dispiriting, where things are very difficult, where, for instance, where you get hundreds of boxes in Discovery of, document after document after document. I mean, of course, that's designed to dispirit you, I'm sure, naturally. But and then you look at all the sort of the cost to your your marriage, your family life, your health, all those costs during this long campaign. I want to talk about faith a little bit. I mean, certainly people lost faith during that time, and it's to be expected with a huge class action. I mean, people will die sadly during that long period of time. So how do you maintain your faith when people are quite understandably losing theirs?
Yeah, again, I guess I keep thinking back to, what Mr. Tennant had said, that if we can just get this information, if we can just find a way to show people the same things we're seeing, these facts, that things will change, that we can move forward, we can get over these hurdles, and that's what led to us making this decision, for example, to create this big science panel that nobody had ever done before, to try to study these chemicals, because we kept hearing, oh, you're making this up, or this, these are a bunch of lawyers trying to create. No, we wanted to actually have scientists sit down and look at the objective facts, and then tell everybody, based on the actual facts, here's what this chemical can do to you, and it's based on the science and it's based on the facts, and that took a long time, 7 years for that process to play out. And as you mentioned, in the meantime, people in that community were continuing to get sick. I was getting calls. People were dying, during this process. And that was very difficult. You see that, fairly vividly displayed in the movie. I talk about it in the book as well. That was a very difficult period of time. Not only were we waiting, for these facts to come out, but the economy was imploding during that period. This was 2008 to 2011, and at least in the U.S., we had some real economic struggles. So there are a lot of heavy burdens there. But again, just kept thinking, this, ultimately, this truth will come out, and it eventually did. But it was difficult. A lot of folks were wanting to pull the plug, or saying, look, this is taking too long. Maybe there's a different way to do it. But I guess I was a firm believer that stay the course, keep at it, keep your eye, as one of my partners used to say, keep your eye on the ultimate prize here, which is to get this story out, get this science confirmed, and things will change.
Tell us a little bit about those sort of, I mean, clearly you've got a rock solid family, a rock solid wife. That's excellent to see. But I mean, there must have been those moments, obviously it does come across in the film, where, you're all consumed, literally, because it's just you and some supporters, and you're having to do a lot of donkey work to get this information out there. How did you cope as a family?
Yeah, I was, again, as I mentioned, so many things had to line up just the right way. And one of the most important, of course, was being fortunate enough to be married to my wife, Sarah, and you see that, I think, demonstrated in the film. And, just an incredible person who, is very faith grounded, grew up in the Catholic Church, and just is extremely, positive and focused on, that people are going to do the right thing, and was luckily had been trained as a lawyer. She had been working at a big law firm before our first child was born, and she decided then to stay home for the next period while we were raising the kids. But she knew, she had that understanding of what it was like to be working, at a big firm and having a case like this. But I think, she was and is, just a special person who was able to see that, this is gonna be helpful to so many people. If we're able to get this out and to prevail here, that and my kids, all three sons, were, grew up and lived throughout this process, watching this. And, I think a testament to that. One of my middle son, Charlie, just is starting law school right now. He wants to be an environmental lawyer and help tackle, chemical issues. My youngest is that as well. So I mean, I think it's had a big impact with them, and they've been a tremendous support.
Well, you're not going to like me for saying this. I know you're not, because I can see you're a humble guy. But I think you're a hero. You're a bit of a modern day saint, to be quite frank. But interestingly, one of our saints, new ones, St. John Henry Newman, he said that everybody is created for a definite purpose, each one of us. So this must be your definite purpose, to take on this fight and to open the eyes of those that don't know and to bring about change. Do you see it that way?
I have my wife has said that, and I have been sort of beginning to see that as well. I guess I step back and I look at it and I think, there were so many points in time where we could have stopped. For example, when we first reached a settlement for Mr. Tennant, the farmer, back in 2001, we could have just said, okay, we're done. I presented this information to the EPA, let them run with it, and just backed off. But I just felt the need to continue to do it, and so we took on the class action. And then even when we settled that case in 2004, we could have stopped. We could have said, all right, we're turning all this information over to these scientists, and whatever they do, that's fine. No, I couldn't do that. I wanted to make sure that process worked the way it was supposed to. And then when that finished, in 2012, we had thousands of people who had these diseases who needed to be compensated. So we took on their cases and through trials, and that lasted till 2018. And then at that point we could have stopped. And then I realized, wait a minute, now the rest of the world is realizing this is in our drinking water. It's not just in West Virginia. It's all over the country. It's all over the world. So we're now representing states throughout the United States. We're representing water providers, trying to make sure that the people who cause this contamination are the ones cleaning it up, not the taxpayers, not the victims aren't stuck with this. And then I could have really kind of backed off then, but I thought, how do we fix this? People shouldn't have to be going into court for decades fighting over all of this while all of this plays out. I mean, how do we get to the bottom of just resolving this? So I even brought a new case in 2018 where we're seeking to represent everyone in the United States who has these chemicals in their blood, and to set up a new panel, kind of like what we did with PFOA in West Virginia, looking at that chemical, to look at all of these chemicals now. Because as I mentioned, we now know there's not just one or two, there's thousands in this class. And the companies are saying, yeah, but you can't prove those are harmful. Maybe that one was, but you can't prove these new ones are. So trying to find a way to do that, and we're pursuing that case now. So on behalf of millions of people in the United States. So I don't see I don't see slowing down anytime soon. I can see things coming that would be huge victories for public health. The US EPA just announced they will start regulating at least two of these chemicals in the US. That's a step. The EU just announced a potential ban throughout the entire EU of the entire family, of the entire class just last week. So, I mean, huge things are potentially going to happen, and I want to make sure I can see those through.
Now, let's talk briefly about Flame. I mean, for us, 10,000 young Catholics in one place is huge. That's a big thing at the OVO Arena in Wembley in London. 4th of March, not too far away now. Young people, we have to say, quite rightly, are very passionate. They're passionate about their faith. They're passionate about social justice. Some of us that lack the energy, they go out there and give it some, thankfully. So I want to know what you're going to be saying to them.
This is exactly the group that I would love to have. I'm just really looking forward to being able to speak to young people. I speak to different college groups and universities across the country because this, as you mentioned, I mean, these are the people that have the passion and that are going to make the change, that are going to see this through. And they're much more attuned to a lot of these issues than folks in our generation may have been. And, I love to see that passion. I love to see people who realize that they can make a difference. One person standing up, speaking out, saying, you know what, we can change this, that it can happen. And I'm hoping that the folks come away, at least looking at this story, realizing, here's an example. Here you had a farmer in West Virginia, who went up against one of the biggest corporations on the planet, who went up against the entire US regulatory system, the legal system, the scientific process, and was able to actually start something that is now changing that. The laws are changing. The internationally, that there are changes just from that individual standing up and speaking out and saying, you know what, these may be some of the biggest adversaries, some of the biggest foes that there can be, but we can take them on, and we can do what's right, and things can be changed. So it's really looking forward to being able to talk to an audience like that.
And I really like the fact that Mr. Tennant was more interested in the message getting out there. He didn't come across as being particularly interested in getting money for himself, despite his sufferings.
At that point, he had pretty much already lost his entire herd of cattle. He and his family had been sickened, and unfortunately, he and his wife both passed away, before a lot of this information ever saw the light of day. But, he was very passionate about making sure people saw what was happening, that this truth got out there. And we're really honored to be able to have worked with him and to be able to help him do that. And one of the really rewarding times here was when the film Dark Waters was finished. We were able to set up a screening for his family in West Virginia. So they got to see, how their family, their father, was able to help bring the story out. And I think that was a really moving event.
And what I like about what you said, actually, is that he stood against the big company. He's the one that stood up and had the bravery. Because I kind of, you watch the film and you think, oh, that was Rob standing up. But I guess that the truth of it is, if he hadn't come to you in the first place and been brave enough to not be financially motivated, but just wanting this truth to out, as it were, it wouldn't have happened, would it?
Absolutely not. I'm just the lawyer. I'm there representing these folks. I'm there helping them. But this is Mr. Tennant and Mr. Kiger, and the community members, the people that came forward in that community and stood up against what was, one of the town's biggest employers, and stood up against, a lot of their neighbors and family and friends, to say, this is not right. Shouldn't be happening. And there was, as you see in the film, and you get a little more detail in the book, there was a lot of resistance to that. There were a lot of folks that didn't like that. It continues to this day in that town, because of the firm, entrenched position of the company. But, having that passion, those people were able to make incredible change to better all of those folks, their entire community, and frankly, the whole world.
A little UK slant on this. I mean, it would be quite easy for us to sort of say, oh, well, that's primarily in the States, despite what you've said about this stretching. I mean, without being alarmist, we do need to be very well aware of this in the UK, don't we?
Absolutely. And I've been, working with groups in the UK, for quite some time to try to help get the information more prevalent within the UK. When the film Dark Waters rolled out, we had an event where Mark Ruffalo and I were able to talk before the UK Parliament, to try to raise awareness about PFAS. Because again, keep in mind, all these products that we're talking about, they're worldwide. They're shipped globally, and even if you might not have a manufacturing facility making these chemicals right next to you, the products are coming in, and the emissions from those factories, whether they be in the US or China. Unfortunately, this stuff gets up into the air, it gets up into the clouds, and it rains down over the entire planet. That's why we're now finding these chemicals in rainwater all over the place. So it's the UK is not spared by this. And in fact, I think one of the reasons you may not see as much discussion of it yet is I don't think there's been as much sampling. We're looking for it yet. In the United States, they're out sampling drinking water supplies. They're looking for this chemical. They're testing the soil and the water, and it's being found virtually everywhere. Same thing in other places like in Italy or Japan, outside U.S. military bases. Because again, one of the primary methods for spraying these chemicals into the world has been one product in particular, firefighting foam, a type of firefighting foam called aqueous film forming foam, or AFFF. It's the type of firefighting foam you use to combat petroleum fires. So outside every military base, every airport, every fire station, all right, people have been spraying that stuff in foam out onto the ground for decades.
It
Unfortunately,
doesn't break down or go away, does it?
it's full of PFAS. And unfortunately, nobody was ever told that when they were buying the foam, or the people that were using it, like the firefighters, were never told, hey, this stuff's got PFAS in it. So unfortunately, outside all these locations where the foam was used, we're finding PFAS. So when the sampling starts to begin in the UK in a more comprehensive way, I would suspect we're going to start finding a lot of this, unfortunately.
Well, I hope we open our eyes at the very least. It's a start. But tell me one thing, Rob. It's right to point out when these chemicals that are being used for sort of technological advancement purposes, cleaning this, cleaning that, stopping, increasing resistance of this and that. Okay, we find out they're bad and they're harmful and they're causing cancers and numerous other problems. Do we not have a certain responsibility to sort of help find alternatives?
Absolutely. And in fact, that's something you see happening now worldwide. As the information has come out about these chemicals and all the different uses, as you can imagine, there was initially a lot of pushback by the manufacturers saying, these are such useful chemicals. They're in all these products that we want and that we need. And then people started to realize, well, a lot of these products, would you exchange your health for a stain-resistant carpet or a stain-resistant jacket? Where's the trade-off here? And as the information's come out and people have realized the types of products these things are in, consumers are speaking out. Consumers are reaching out to the companies that are using these, saying, we don't want these in our products anymore. So major fast food companies, carpet retailers, cosmetic firms, clothing retailers are coming out and publicly saying, we're not going to use these PFAS chemicals anymore. Even before the rules and regulations change, the market is forcing that. And so they're now turning to alternative chemicals. And the concern, of course, is you don't want to just switch to others within that same family that may have the same problems, but to really safe alternatives. Because we don't want to end up with what a lot of folks refer to as regrettable substitutions. You move from one and you just end up with something just as bad. And we've already seen that with Teflon, for example. DuPont, when all this came out, the companies agreed they'd stop using PFOA, all right, which was one of these chemicals with 8 carbons, a C8. Instead, they said we're going to switch to a safe replacement chemical. And all that was C8, and they took 2 carbons off. C6. They renamed it Gen X, and that started going out into Teflon. That started going out into all these products. And unfortunately, when the science got done, it finally started to show that stuff caused the same problems PFOA did, caused the same cancers in rats that PFOA did. So now people are saying we've really got to make sure we are finding truly safe alternatives and not just replacements within the same group.
Well, look, as I say, I see you as a modern day saint, and I certainly salute you for all your masses of hard work and your family, because you can't do it on your own, quite frankly. So just finally, for those sitting at home thinking, it's complicated, it's these chemical names are long enough and the acronyms are quite hard to get my head around. In a nutshell, for those just wondering what they can do or what their part is in this, what would you say to them?
I think the most important thing is to try to educate yourself on what types of products were these chemicals used in, and to try to start making choices to select products that don't have them, or to encourage the companies that are moving away to do it, to make sure that market is there for these companies to move away. Because frankly, it's taking a long time to get the rules and the regulations and the legal systems. I mean, that's a huge battle going on. But consumers standing up and making their voices heard is having a much more immediate impact. And finding that information is not easy, but there are groups out there that are posting information online about what types of products have these chemicals and which companies are moving away from them. Groups like Green Science Policy Institute, Environmental Working Group, Center for Environmental Health. There are different groups that have made that information available so that people can start making choices that will make a difference.
Thanks ever so much for joining us. It's a really important message, and a message that I hope is spread far and wide in the UK too, so we ourselves can look at this more deeply, take personal responsibility, and consume accordingly. So, Rob Bilott, thank you so much for giving us some time. And I tell you what, we're looking forward to seeing you on the 4th of March in London for Flame.
Thank you so much. I look forward to being there.